Dr. Frank Mitloehner is a professor and air quality specialist in the Department of Animal Science at the University of California. He is one of the speakers who will be delivering a talk at the Beef 2021 Symposium, and he joins me now. Frank, thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, of course, you're welcome.
So, you, I understand, have been to Australia before. You worked on properties in northwest Queensland, am I right?
That is right, yes. Yeah, I have worked on anything from tropical fruit farms to stations, cattle stations, and I had a super time.
Wow, tell us about some of those memories. What exactly were you doing while you were in Queensland, and when was that?
I was in my 20s and I was very interested in agriculture, but had really no idea. No idea. And I just sent some emails to ranchers over there and introduced myself and told them that I would very much like to do an internship with them. Not asking for money, so not work for them for money, but just to gain experience. And in return, all I asked for was that they give me a bed and something to eat and let me work with them. And they did. I mean, I worked on, I want to say maybe 10 or 20 or so. I did this several times, not just once, in different years. And it was just a totally unique experience, and I will be forever thankful to those people in Charters Towers and so on. I will never forget them.
You are highly qualified and you've done an intense amount of study throughout your career and specialise, if I'm correct, in the broad field of environmental management when it comes to agriculture. Can you tell us about your line of work and your line of study?
Yeah, I'm an air quality specialist, so I study the impacts, the atmospheric impacts of animal agriculture. So that could be greenhouse gases, could be odors, particles, and so on. Some of them are more a nuisance issue, others are more of a regulatory issue. So I quantify those emissions and most importantly, find ways to mitigate them. So that could be finding ways to mitigate manure emissions, for example, or as we know, belching is a significant source of methane. Finding ways to reduce enteric emissions, and so that is something that is very much of interest to our farmers and ranchers, but also of interest to society as a whole. And so that's what I've been doing for a long time. And I think slowly but surely I'm getting the hang of it.
Very good. Now, I'm sure you are with all the academic work you do in that field. Now, obviously, many industries are finding ways and making efforts to reduce the amount of CO2 emissions. How big an impact does the beef industry have when it comes to CO2 emissions? Is it overstated in the media? Is there a sort of a false perception, or is it a pretty serious emitter of greenhouse gases?
So, first of all, the greenhouse gases are oftentimes converted into what's called CO2e, CO2 equivalent units. But the main gas is really methane. The second most important gas is nitrous oxide. And beef cattle, dairy cattle, and so on, they do produce a fair amount of methane and also some nitrous oxide. And so that, I think, is unquestionable. But when you see and when you read, when you follow the media, it's oftentimes portrayed as if cattle were the leading source of these greenhouse gases worldwide, and that is a blatant misinformation. In most developed countries, fossil fuel activities such as transport and power production and cement industry, these three main sectors amount to around 80%, 80% of greenhouse gases. Animal agriculture in the US, for example, or most European countries, total less than 5%. So it's 80% from fossil fuel sectors, it's 5% from the livestock sector, approximately, give or take. The numbers are a little bit different in Australia because the livestock sector is very important to Australia, but it's not drastically more. It's about that. So globally, if you want to know some global numbers, globally beef contributes to 6% of all greenhouse gases. Dairy to 3% of all greenhouse gases. In the United States, it's 3% for beef, 2% for dairy that they contribute to greenhouse gases in this country.
Is the industry on board? Is the industry, in your view, making positive steps to address this? Is there enough attention being given to reducing emissions?
So I would say that overall, many of the industries were slow to acknowledge their contributions. And secondly, we're slow in working on mitigation. But I think that has changed because even if you personally don't believe that your industry has an impact, even if you wouldn't believe that, then that will not lead to a situation where this issue will go away. Your customers, your clients, some of them quite large, like McDonald's or Walmart or so, they have these concerns and they will raise them and say, we will only buy from you if you show what your climate impacts are and you show us ways you reduce them. And if they say that, and they make a big problem of it, then it's your problem. And it's something that you better respond to or else you'll be replaced. I mean, that's just the way the world is these days.
So how do you address emissions in the beef industry? I mean, you say that, well, obviously it comes from, manure and belching and that kind of thing. Emissions are in the nature of the beast, so to speak. So what do you do to try and minimise that? I mean, you have to be able to produce beef en masse, but if, in their biological makeup, this is what they do, produce CO2, then how do you bring that down?
Yeah, they do produce methane, and that's natural. And actually, it's a trade-off for something really remarkable that they are capable of doing, which is, cattle can eat something nobody else can, and that's cellulose. It's the world's most abundant biomass that they cannot just eat, but convert into animal source foods that we also enjoy. Unfortunately, as an unintended consequence, that conversion of cellulose into animal source food comes with a price tag, and that's the release of methane. But it doesn't have to be that way. We have done some research trials, and my colleagues in Australia and elsewhere have done too, where we looked into how via feed additives we can reduce enteric emissions. And we found that there are 5 out of 100 feed additives that actually do reduce enteric methane to a large extent. The one that's relatively less effective reduces it by 10%, but we find some that reduce methane by up to 50% and more. And actually, one of those additives grows right where you are in Australia, and it's Aspergopsis. It's a seaweed, a special variety that grows in the warmer climates. It has a strong impact on reducing methane. It also has some unintended consequences. It's not all just wonderful. There are also some things that are not so wonderful. For example, the seaweed can affect feed intake, and there are some other issues around it. But I think that over the next 5 years, we will overcome some of the shortages some of these additives have, and not just see an advantage in reducing methane, but also an advantage because they are improving performance of cattle.
Okay, it's fascinating stuff, and no doubt going to be imperative if the cattle industry is going to meet its greenhouse gas obligations, and we certainly look forward, Dr. Mitloehner, to hearing more about it at the Beef Symposium in a few weeks' time. Thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to the meeting. Thanks.